talk about Brittany's episode of Crime Story. If you are someone like me who has actually read her first book, then a lot of what she talked about in this episode was pretty familiar because she spoke on this in her first book, which I highly recommend. 10 out of 10. It was amazing. It was like over 300 pages, and I sat down and read it in one sitting because I could not put the book down. And I actually did a review on it if you want to go like more in depth. And I wanted to actually read her second book too, but the first one, like, I got a good deal on Kindle. It was only like $10 on Kindle or $25 for a paperback. So I did the Kindle, but with the second book she came out with, she only was giving the option to buy a paperback version, and I think it's like $25, and then you have to pay shipping on top of that. I don't know, I might get it and do a review on it. If that's something you guys want to see, let me know. This is the description of her second book. I pulled my drug bag out of my purse and fixed myself up with a shot right there on the center console. After lifting the sleeves of my shirt, I was quickly reminded that my arms hadn't healed much during the week I was asleep. I took my sock and shoe off and popped my foot up on the steering wheel. The foot it is, I said out loud to myself. I was relieved to see a fat, juicy vein protruding from my big toe. I scrunched up my face full of pain as the needle pierced my skin. The only thing more painful than slamming in your hand was slamming in your foot. I coughed hard as the rush hit me and the meth traveled through my bloodstream. I applied pressure with my sock to try and stop the bleeding. Okay, so pretty much it just sounds like a lot of her experiences on drugs, as it pretty much describes in the title. But in this episode, she explained that she pretty much had a pretty rocky childhood. At a very young age, her parents were both really bad alcoholics. They were both gamblers, and they were actually born in, where is it, Alaska, but then I guess things got so bad they decided to up and leave overnight. Her mom and stepfather ended up moving her to Vegas at only 12 years old, and her parents were really bad alcoholics, so they're constantly drinking and gambling. Like, the worst place to go if you have some kind of habit is Vegas, because it's a city that never sleeps. And Brittany, she ended up having to step up and almost be like the mother to her sisters because there's no parent in the household to really help them. Just like Quaylen and a lot of other cast members, when the parent's not very absent or not very present in the home, the kid's gonna go find attention elsewhere. So Brittany went out and she started venturing out into the streets, and she quickly got mixed up in the wrong crowd. One night she's just walking down Fremont crying, and some woman saw her this, and you're gonna feel all better. And Brittany fell in love as soon as she tried meth for the first time at only 12 years old. I think Brittany thought, okay, this is awesome. This girl's being friendly with me. She's giving me free drugs. I'm just going to attach myself to this girl and have a new bestie, and then I'll get all the perks that comes along with hanging out with her. But that girl ended up dipping out and leaving Brittany the next day, and then Brittany's left craving more drugs with no money to get any. So she started resorting to anything she could think of. She was stealing from stores and going and returning the merchandise so she could get a gift card. Then she would either find someone that wanted that specific gift card in the streets to buy, or she would go find a shop that bought gift cards at a discount. And then she eventually got pretty bold to where she was just stealing from people on the streets. And then she ends up meeting this guy, and I guess this guy was like a big time plug. His name was like Chulapa or Chalupa or something like that. But pretty much this guy, I don't think he was moving so smart for being a big plug. He meets Brittany, and the very first day he meets this 12-year-old girl, he decides to bring her back to his trap house where he leaves all his drugs, and he let her into all his operations, and he had her up and down Fremont selling dope for him at only 12 years old. Maybe he thought the likeliness of her being like a police informant at 12 years old was low, But still, I would be scared because at 12 years old, you know, she doesn't really know much. She could just easily go back home tomorrow and go tell her mom, and her mom can go to the police station and tell on him, and next thing you know, the police would be kicking in his door. But he trusted Brittany, and he trusted her so much that he hands over this big old bag of dope to her day one and had her and this girl selling dope, and things got pretty comfortable for Brittany. She had a spot to stay, she had unlimited dope, but then her drug dealer started noticing that Brittany was just getting out of control with it. She was getting too high off her own supply to where she really wasn't making a profit, and he's like, oh no, we gotta do something about this. So he decided to reduce how much he was giving her, to the point where he was still giving her some, but it was barely enough to where she could barely stay awake or function. That can also be a method of control that some people do. I had an ex-boyfriend back in my troublemaking days that used to do the same exact thing, but it's because he didn't want me like full on like throwing up all over the place, but he also didn't want me to get too high to where I was like running away. He wanted to make sure I stayed close because I'm always waiting on my next fix, and that's, I think, what he was trying to do to Brittany. But also, I mean, at 12 years old, I'm pretty sure she didn't have much self-control either, and she was sitting there venting to this girl that was selling dope with her for Chalupa or whatever the hell his name was, and Brittany's like, you know what, F this guy. And this girl was like, you know what, yeah, F him, this guy's an asshole. To wait until he gave them a nice fat sack, and then they decided to make a run for it. They're like, okay, we're gonna go here real quick, we'll be right back. But instead, they decided to go get a hotel down the street, which I think was a big rookie mistake. I mean, Brittany was a rookie. I mean, she's 12 years old. But still, if you're going to try to steal from someone, at least try to go to like a different neighborhood or area of the city. But she didn't even try to hide. They literally went right down the street. They found a hotel, and the manager was actually willing to give them a room for some dope. And Brittany was sitting there, and as soon as they're going inside the room, somebody that actually knew Chalupa, because Chalupa was the plug. Like, a lot of people in the area knew him. They're like, oh my God, there's Brittany. She sells for Chalupa. So they come running up to Brittany and they're like, oh girl, how much do you got on you? I was just calling Chalupa because I was about to go see him. But since you're here, why don't I just get it off you? And then they called Chalupa. They got Chalupa on the phone right there. And they're like, yeah, I see your girl Brittany. She's over here at the hotel. And he's like, what? Next thing you know, before Brittany even knew what was going on, Chalupa comes running around the corner and just socks her in the face, and she went slamming onto the ground. And of course, he jacks all his dope back and just kind of left her hanging after that, because he knew he couldn't trust her because she just wasn't doing the dope. She was letting the dope do her. So now Brittany was back to square one. She didn't have no hustle. She didn't have anywhere to go, so she's just walking up and down Fremont, and honestly, she's so lucky that she didn't get snatched up and like thrown into a sex trafficking ring, especially being like in Fremont in the Vegas area. But she was sitting there walking down Fremont one day, and she walked by this hotel, and there's this guy that was a security officer at a hotel, and he took a liking to Brittany, and they quickly bonded over the fact that they both like crystal meth. And this man was much older. I can't remember his exact age. I believe he was in his later 30s. I want to say he was in his later 30s. He was about 25 years older than Brittany. But still, he was in no freaking position to be hanging out with a 12-year-old girl, let alone sleeping with her, because that's where it quickly progressed. He saw Brittany was vulnerable, and he was like, hey girl, I got everything you need. I'm a security officer at this hotel, so they give me free hotel rooms. I get paid for my job, so I can buy you all the dope you want, and we can just live happily ever after in this ghetto hotel. And she's like, all right, bet. So next thing you know, they're living together in the hotel and everything was going fine at first. And she actually talked about some crazy stuff in her book. Like he was having her do the most craziest stuff in the bedroom with her all the time. I think she said something like he was like really into anal sex or something crazy, and she was doing a lot for a 12-year-old girl. And he was sitting there and going to work, and he'd come home to her, and after a few months the hotel he was working at caught on to what was going on, and they did not feel comfortable having their security guard have this 12-year-old girl in his hotel room. I mean, that does not look good for the hotel at all, letting their employee have an underage girl living there. And they're like, you know what? You need to make her leave or we're going to fire you. So he ends up going to Brittany and he's like, you know what? You're not supposed to be here, so I need you to stay here 24/7. You're not allowed to leave the room at all. And if you do, then we can both get kicked out and I'll get fired. And Brittany was like, okay. So she was pretty much held hostage in that hotel for months. I'm sure that guy was loving it because he had full-on control at Brittany at that time. And Brittany really didn't have anyone else beyond that guy. But eventually, somehow the hotel was able to find out that she was still there in that room. So they ended up firing this guy and kicking them out. And this guy decided to like steal all kinds of different items from the hotel. I can't remember everything she described in the book, but she said he was just doing the stupidest things like rugs. I don't even remember everything she said, but he stole a lot. He was stealing money and he just went on the run. And so they ended up leaving and they went and stayed somewhere else. I think they went to another hotel. And then next thing you know, the police come pounding and knocking on the door. She opens the door and her and that guy both got arrested. And she ended up getting pregnant 2 different times with this man. I think she got pregnant when she was 13 and when she was 14, she said, which that is so freaking young. I just can't believe like her parents, like after the first kid, weren't like, okay, we need to do a better job as parents trying to be there for her. After the second child, she decided she was finally done with this guy. And this guy was eventually arrested and went to prison. I'm not sure if it's because he ended up having sex with Brittany when she was underage. But if you do purchase her actual book, she does have information like on his arrest and pictures of him. And this is just somebody that you would never imagine Brittany being with. I don't think Brittany would ever look twice at this guy if he was walking down the same street as her. Like when you look at him, like, guys who mess with kids, I'm not saying all of them do, but I've noticed that a lot of them have like a certain look to them. Like you can kind of tell. This guy definitely had that look. He was fat, nerdy looking, he was balding, and you could tell that he probably wouldn't typically be able to pull a girl if he wasn't taking advantage of somebody like Brittany. But Brittany still went back to him, had a second kid with him, but after the second kid, she's like, you know what? I'm done with this guy. This guy's a creep. And she ended up calling her mom and just crying her heart out to her mom and said, Mom, please, I need you more than ever. Please let me come home. So her mom finally was like, you know what? Come home. She welcomed her with open arms. And for once, Brittany felt like her mom was really trying to make an effort to be a good mother to Brittany and make sure that things were going to change when she got home. But once Brittany came home, she realized that the looks were very deceiving. Her mom and stepfather put on this happy family persona like the first few days, but then Brittany quickly realized that things were bad as ever. They're like 20 times worse than Brittany had ever remembered them being. And she's like, oh, hell no, I cannot put up with this. But she had her 2 kids and she had nowhere to go. When Brittany moved back in, she moved in under the agreement that she was going to be sober. And she was sober at first. After she got away from her ex, she sobered up and she wanted to be a good mother to her kids. But once she moved back in with her parents, things were way too stressful, so she ended up turning back to drugs. And her stepfather ended up finding out that she was using, and he decided to call CPS and got her kids taken away. And she claims at the time of filming she has not been able to see her kids since. And we saw on the show she tried to figure out ways to contact them and get in touch with them, but the court actually denied her request and told her that she's going to have to try again later. But spoiler alert, she did finally end up reuniting with her 2 children last year. She ended up being able to go to one of their birthday parties, and I'm very curious how she was able to finally connect with them. It looked like one of them was at least 18 or close to 18, so maybe once they're 18 they're finally able to get that option to get their mother's contact information and reach out. But she looks so happy being reconnected with her kids. But I'm skipping forward too much, so let me rewind it back to where I was. So she ends up relapsing. She got her kids taken away, and she was so mad at her stepdad and blamed her stepdad for losing her kids. But honestly, I don't think it's fair to blame her stepdad. Like, yes, I feel like he should have been like, okay, I'm gonna give you a chance to go to rehab right now, and if you don't go to rehab, then I'm calling CPS. I don't know the full story and if he came to her and offered her that option, but if he didn't, then I think that's hella messed up to just jump the gun and call CPS before sitting Brittany down and talking to her. But he probably knew after seeing how Brittany was with drugs in the past that once she picks up, then it's just freaking hell on high wheels after that, and she is not gonna stop. And he ends up getting her kids taken away, and like I said, she was blaming him, but I honestly feel like if he didn't call CPS, then it was just a matter of time before she put her kids in danger being around them high, or gotten them taken away herself because she was still living a life of crime and eventually got arrested and went to prison. So if her stepdad didn't call the police on or call CPS on her, then she would eventually got them taken away anyways when she went to prison. Brittany lost her kids, and then she just gave up on life. She said if she couldn't have her kids, then she was just going to be a druggie and focus on meth for the rest of her life. She didn't have no life goals. She didn't have no ambitions. All she wanted to do was get high from the time she woke up until she went to sleep. So she ends up eventually meeting this guy named Alfred, and this guy was an older man. I can't remember exactly how old he was, but I believe she said he was like in his late 50s or 60s, and he was pretty much her sugar daddy. From the way she described it, it sounds like he wasn't using drugs with her, but he didn't mind her using drugs. And again, I think that was just a controlled tactic. He knew as long as he continued giving her money for drugs, then he was going to have a short leash on her. And that's exactly what he wanted. But eventually, Brittany and him ended up getting into a fight, and I can't remember exactly what the fight was over, but they had a disagreement, and Brittany ended up leaving one night, and she went and hung out with this dude, and they were getting high all night, and she was like, oh, don't worry, I got money at home, I'll pay you when I get home. So he kept fronting her more and more drugs, and he ended up giving her a tattoo, and she's like, yeah, I got the money at home, no worries. So he starts driving her home, and she's like, yeah, so I don't have any money, but this guy that I'm staying with, he's my roommate, he actually has money, and I'm just going to go inside and get the money and pay you. And he's like, okay, cool. So she pulls up, she goes inside, and she starts talking to the guy, and next thing you know, the guy that she was getting high with, who tattooed her, he was in a car full of other dudes, and they just all start running up to this dude's house. They run inside his house, and they rob him and beat him senselessly. And Brittany said she looks over, she sees this man screaming, help, help, Brittany, because she's the only familiar face there. And he's like, Brittany, please help me. And he looks over, and his eye is protruding from his face. And what does Brittany do? She grabs his car keys and jumps in his car and drives off. And I'm like, oh my God. I hope she feels real bad for that one. But I'm sure she's had plenty of time to really reflect on that. And I will say, I really do 100% believe that Brittany is 100% remorseful and has learned from what she's done. But at that time, oh my God, she did not respond the right way. I think Brittany just wanted to get as far away as possible from the situation at that time. But come on, you gotta use some common sense. If these guys are beating this guy senselessly, his eyes protruding from his face, then he's obviously gonna call the police if he survives. And if he's gonna call the police and report this, if you steal his car on top of it, he's gonna report that too, and that's just more prison time. But I think Brittany was just so young, and she had gotten away with so much stuff and just got a slap on the wrist so many times that she really didn't understand the severity of her crimes. So she leaves with this dude's truck, she ends up getting caught up, and she went to prison, and then she gets out, and we saw her on the show, and she's been doing so amazing since she got out of prison. She ended up moving to Florida. Unfortunately, her and Marcelino broke up or split up after he cheated on her. And it sounds like she's currently single. I haven't really heard her talk much on her love life since Marcelino. But she was living in Florida at the time of filming this Crime Story spinoff. And they said she has a very successful real estate business down there. But since they filmed this, she has started a cleaning business and put all of her focus in that. So she has like this cleaning business, and she said at the end of the episode that she plans to move to Missouri, which I thought that was very interesting because I'm actually from Missouri, and I'm like, okay, out of all the places you can go, why Missouri? I don't ever remember her ever mentioning like having any family or friends in Missouri, so I'm really perplexed why she's choosing Missouri out of all places. Like maybe she's just tired of Florida and the uncertainty that comes along with living in Florida because there's just constant hurricanes and stuff like that. But maybe she met like a special someone who lives in Missouri, and that's why she wants to move here. I don't know, but I'm sure we'll end up hearing more from her in the future, because it seems like every season where they do little Where Are They Now segments, they always bring Brittany back to give us an update. And I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear a current update on her and Marcelino. They seem to have a good co-parenting relationship. They recently celebrated one of their children's birthdays, and they're both there at the party. But that is pretty much it, guys.